So this is the objective of this module. So before we start any module, we give you an objective that what are we going to cover in the next 3 hours, and this is just to give you a quick snapshot so that you know what we are discussing and what all that we plan to cover for today's session. So we'll just start with a high-level introduction of web services versioning. Then after the introduction, we'll try to understand what is the need of versioning and what actually make the versioning happen. So versioning comes when there is some change which happen in the existing services, right? So we'll try to understand what is the need of versioning. So I hope you guys must be very familiar with this slide, right? Because in most of the sessions we start with this slide, and there is a special reason why we start with this. So with every session we go back to the root cause that and this slide gives you the justification of why we are developing a REST web services, what is the need of the SOA concepts, what is SOA architecture, what do you get out of this SOA architecture. And today again this slide will give you a direct or the indirect context of the versioning of REST services. So again we see that any ongoing enterprise business level entity changes. So if we all know that any enterprise business is an ongoing business and any business undergoes changes, right? So we all know that the category of changes for any business could be the technological changes, could be the regulatory changes, could be the new business changes, or could be some other changes with respect to different changes in geographies, or the business is expanding, or business strategists want to make some changes in the business, or there's a new line of business which enters a business, right? So any business need to have some changes, and which the changes are recursive, the changes are repetitive, and they continue to happen, and we cannot seize those changes, right? So changes are natural to happen, and this is why we have the infrastructure, the IT applications that we deploy, that we use, have to be so robust so that the applications can undergo a change. The modules can undergo a change and the services can undergo a change. So I started from generic to specific. So I say IT application, then I came to module, then I came to services, right? So this slide is just to give you an overview that and why these changes are needed for any system to adapt, for the sustainability, for the cost overruns, right? Time to market. If you see, if I'm just highlighting my arrow, time to market. So this is very important concept, because we cannot eventually end up doing the job, and we always have a timeline, right? If I talk of some regulatory changes which comes, right, especially in the field of finance and telecom, so they are so stringent changes that they come directly from the government agencies, and they always have a stop date, right? Maybe by December 31st, 2015, all the telecom operators have to undergo this change, and this is a must change for all the telecom authorities. So these are very stringent changes, and they have a very high value to the business, right? The impact is very high. So on the similar lines, that again, that if we see the table below, can you see this table, benefits of the above versioning? Okay, so I'll straight away come to this, the table that we have incorporated here. So we all know why do we do the versioning and what all it takes to do the versioning, right? So we're just trying to understand from a very high level point here that how this versioning of your services or versioning of your products, whatever. So just try to understand the versioning concept from a very high level perspective here. Don't directly go into the REST web services. Let's say any product that you want to version, right? So the benefits remains the same that we have been discussing: the agility and the appropriateness, scalability and performance, security and data protection, accuracy and timelines, and availability and recoverability, right? So these are five basic, very strong fundamentals for any business change, and this is the same reason, and these are the same benefits which versioning gives you directly or indirectly. So once you do this versioning, what favors this versioning? Again, the impact could be direct or it could be indirect, that you can have multiple contracts, you can have multiple consumers and providers, no single responsibility principle and tightly coupled, and fine-grained implementation. So what is this multiple contracts here? So multiple contracts is that an organization in terms of business, in terms of technology, can have multiple contracts with different, so because organization business is a business entity. It has business partners, it has consumers, it has customers, right? So the organization can have multiple contracts with different agents, with different business partners. It may not have to be technology specific. The organization can roll out different technology solutions based on different platforms, so that even the organizations, the business partners who works on the legacy technologies, they can still be part of your business, and they can give business value addition to the enterprise. Multiple consumers and providers, again, since we have multiple contracts, the consumer base will grow and the provider base will grow, right? Because everything is actually not provided by the enterprise. If you remember, I was taking a telecom example. When you go for a BlackBerry service on your mobile, so you assume that the BlackBerry service is given by the T-Mobile, but actually it is not. It is given by the BlackBerry, which is the research in motion company, and the T-Mobile goes back to BlackBerry and say, this is my customer, this customer requesting for a BlackBerry plan and BlackBerry services, and the BlackBerry company gives back those services, and the services are extended to the end customer from the T-Mobile network. So there are a lot of business partners which are engaged, and that is the reason why we need to have different contracts and different providers. No single responsibility. So again, no single responsibility in a context that there are so many services, there are so many consumers. So if any one of the implementation goes down for any reason, the servers, let's say the Canadian servers go down, or your any geographical related servers goes down, or there is a specific service which goes down because the UAT didn't happen well and there was a bug which was encountered in production, so it will not impact your entire business. There would be some part of the consumers that would be impacted, and they would be automatically redirected to a different versions, right? So, and what all it consequences to, again, which is very important from the leadership team or for the strategists, business strategists, that you have less cost overruns, you have less time to market, right? And you have no single point of failure, low maintainability and resolvability, which is important for any project manager, program manager, portfolio manager, and business strategist, and the leadership team that governs the project, all the project business stakeholders, right? And even the technical stakeholders will have their life very easy. And what is the final outcome of all this that we do is the return on investment. So just try to understand from a business landscape that whatever business that we do it for a return on investment, right? And future roadmap. So if you're doing your current things well, then the organization has a very bright and very dedicated and defined goals and strategy for the years ahead. So this slide, the intent of this slide was to again not only focus on the rest, the web services versioning here, but again whatever that we are discussing for these sessions, that this slide will again complement the SOA architecture, the services, why the services are needed, and why what is the advantage when we do the versioning. So this is let's talk about the introduction and problem statement. So whatever I was talking earlier is very similar, so we'll quickly go through these slides. That web services are bound to change and evolve over time. So this is the slide I've already talked about, so I just go through it quickly. The loose coupling principles of SOA imply that service provider can release a new version of a shared service without waiting for consumer to adapt. And that service consumer should test and certify on a new shared service before switching. So what it says that the service provider has the privilege, has the capability of moving to a new version of the service or business, but before they do that, they always have to notify their end clients, their customers. Because if they don't do that, then the customers, the consumers, the clients would still continue to hit the old services, which may not give the right output or response, or which may not be available at all if because of the new services already launched. Right, and you will see a lot of examples around this concept later in the slides. So you might need to have multiple versions of a shared service running concurrently. So this is, now we are coming directly to the versioning part, that there could be two ways. That let's say we are doing some business, we have a service and the service takes 2 parameters. Now there is some change, right, in the business, and because of that business change, now the service requires 3 parameters, right? Let's say the third parameter could be, you can say the locale or some geographical details that a particular service would need in order to give client back the response. Now there could be 2 ways, that you altogether deprecate the older service and start making the new service working, and you let your clients know, start sending this third response, or sorry, the third request parameter if you want to consume this service anymore. Or the second best approach is that you continue to run both the version of the services for some time, the old service for some time, let the transition happen, let all your clients migrate to the new implementation, and slowly and gradually you can deprecate your old service. So if you guys just notice, I have used the term deprecate so many times. So any one of you has any idea what this deprecate means in terms of the IT arena and programming construct and programming semantic? So this is, okay, Steve says no. Thank you, Steve, for letting me know. Even Satish says no, becoming obsolete. Yes, so Raghu, you are exactly right. So Raghu says it becomes obsolete, exactly. So we have so many, so deprecate is a very general convention that programming languages use, that if let's say there is something which, let's say there is a method which is there in the Java version 5, right? And now the new version of Java comes, and the method which was there early is now deprecated in Java version 6. So that means it is now has been turned into obsolete, and the programmers are advised not to use it anymore. And the compiler will give you the, whenever you try using it, the compiler will give you the instruction that it is obsolete. Do you still want to use it? Right. So this is all about the deprecate part. So I just talked about the 2 approaches. You can continue to the new approach, discard and deprecate the old service altogether, or you can run both services at the same time for some time, so that all your clients can eventually move and gradually move to the new one. So now there is a term which is called HTTP verbs, and you have been already taken a look at what this is all about. But HTTP verbs is again, you might not be knowing that all these method names actually comes under HTTP verbs, right? So when we say get, put, post and delete, so they are actually all HTTP verbs. So what these HTTP verbs do, so HTTP verbs comprise of the portion of uniform interface, which we have already taken a look in day before yesterday class, constraint, and provide as the action counterpart to the noun-based resource, right? So we have been saying that your URI should be a noun, and this is the preference how the URI should sound like, that you should prefer to have nouns. And for every resource that you want to fetch with your URI, you have to use a HTTP verb, which is actually a HTTP operation. So, but in the table that you see here, that we have tried to encapsulate some additional details of these HTTP verbs or HTTP methods, just to give you an overview, because once you start writing your services, these error codes or these method codes would be important for you to do a error handling. So we see that if get returns 200 as a status code, that means everything is okay. You are getting the response back from the provider. So if you remember, I showed you a couple of code examples yesterday, and there was a check that if the HTTP status code is 200, which is returning back from the resource provider, then everything looks fine. And for put, if you see 404 as the status code, so these are not error codes, these are actually status codes, right? And these are called the HTTP status codes. So Hugh is asking me a question. Thank you, Hugh. Recommended return values, recommended by who? So Applin, this is recommended by the organization W3C, which keeps standard of all the HTTP, HTTPS and TCP protocols. I hope you have heard about this W3C organization, right? So they also have a site, w3c.org. So this is not a company, this is a community, right? So W3C and other communities, they maintain all this status codes, so that all the there is a standard which has been followed all across the industry. Similarly, we have some telecom regulatories or telecom communities which maintains about the telecom protocols and telecom stacks and telecom regulations, like related to the 3G, 4G and different data technologies. And similarly, we have these communities for all different spaces, like for electronics and electrical industry, we have similar communities. So these are communities, right? So if it gives you a status code of 201, then everything looks good. And for delete, if it is again 404, as we saw in put, then again it is a problem that the resource was not found. So these status codes gives a very good idea to the developer that, or to the infrastructure team, that what actually happened, right? So the list does not ends up here. There is more to the HTTP status codes that we are seeing. So they are like more than 200 status codes, but the ones which I have used here are the most common status codes, HTTP status codes. Right, so 401 is something when you are non-authorized, 403 is when you are forbidden, 404 not found, conflict, internal server error, right? So once you start doing a hands-on on some technical stuff, then it is always advisable to remember these codes. Okay, so I just move ahead. So this is all some basic overview of what all things would be covered. So this is again some example that related to the HTTP verbs, that how you actually do, and I guess we have already covered most of it. But till we were not discussing, we were not knowing that these are actually HTTP verbs. But in case of verb versioning, this has a convention, and all these comes under the umbrella of HTTP verbs, right? So get, post, put, delete, right? And there is a additional that we see, patch, right? So patch is something, if you remember that, did any one of you here heard about the patch? Okay, I hope not, because this is not very common term. Let me explain you what is a patch. So when we do heavy transactions, when I say heavy, let's say when we do a lot of batch transactions, let's say I'm reading a file and the file has, you just assume it has 10,000 or 20,000 lines, and every line will eventually convert into a database record. And I am doing some batch transactions. What is a batch? That you will not do 10,000 or 20,000 database transactions. You will not fire 10,000 DML statements, data manipulation statements, right? You will club those transactions in one group and one batch, and you will fire the entire batch to the database. So this is the patch, right? Because if you fire each and every statement to the database, your database will go down. You will have to maintain so many connections to the database. So these are more technical terms which usually the architects know, but I'm just giving you an overview that where and how this patch comes into picture. Okay, so now we'll just move ahead with some more details on the versioning. That this article will identify the types of change that occur in services, introduce different patterns that we considered for versioning, and provide guidelines. So we'll see that what all changes can come, how we consider those changes, and how we cater to those changes in real life world. So versioning policy for service oriented systems. So now just we are trying to understand what there is some policy that we cannot just do the versioning as by itself by not following any standard, any protocol, any policy. No, there are certain guidelines and policy which are again driven by W3C community, because if you version something, it should be the standard way of versioning the products or versioning the services as it is during all across the organization. Let's say you download Acrobat Reader or Adobe product 8 point something. Now there is a 9 product which comes out, 9 point something, and someone has 8.7. So there is always a logic that why the product is 8.7 and why this product is 9.0. So you'll see these concepts a little while in the slides itself. So what to version? So what artifacts should we place under version control? So what all that you think actually changes when we actually do the versioning. So it is your visual document, your schemas, your runtime infrastructure. This is all which gets changed. So what is this runtime infrastructure? What is this XML schema? And what is this service interfaces? Probably by now you already knew these terms, but I'll just give you one more quick run through of what this all is. So SOAP services, whenever we have SOAP services, we have the WSDL shared, which is the web service description language, right? And in case of REST, we have WADL, which is web application description language, right? So WSDL has XML schema which tells that okay, this request would have name and ID. Name would be string. It will not have any integer. So all the validation that we tell about each request attribute and response attribute in the XML schema. So what will change in the service? So it could be the business that could be changing, right? As I was giving the example of a third parameter, the location request parameter, or there could be some other thing, some data type which could be changing. So I have taken one very good example here in this slide, and you will understand it better, because without examples you will not understand. And how to version. So these are two very big things that we are trying to understand here. What to version and how to version. And how to version will talk about what tools, techniques and naming schemes that we should use in order to implement a version control. So tools, techniques is something technical, and naming schemes is what I was talking about, that Adobe Reader 8.7 or 9.0. So there is always a standard way of addressing the naming convention, right? It is not just a vague approach, a non-standardized approach that you can rename your version to as per your individual choice. No, that's never the case. Now let's try to understand some more details, some more concepts about changes. backward changes. What is the backward compatibility? So I see a couple of yes and no. If you remember, I was talking this in earlier. So before we actually understand the versioning concept, this is a prerequisite for this session or for the versioning itself, that any audience should understand the compatibility of changes. And there are two compatibility of changes, which is the forward compatibility change and the backward compatibility change. So I'll just quickly run through you that what is the backward compatibility. So I'll just take a very good example here, that let's say we all use Microsoft Office on our machines, right? Let's say the latest Microsoft Office is Office 2013, and previous to that we have Office 2010, and before that Office 2007. Let's say somebody has Office 2007 on his or her machine, which was supporting the doc format, right? So now your system IT person comes to you and say, now we have to upgrade our Microsoft Office, and I will install Microsoft Office 2010 on your machine, right? So the person will come and install, and do you think you would be able to see your documents in Office 2010 because they have been created in Office 2007? Can you please reply with a yes or no? Okay, yes. So Kamal says yes. Thank you, Kamal. But Kamal, according to you, this is a backward compatibility or the forward compatibility? Backward. Great. So Kamal has given the exact answer. It is a backward compatibility. That the product or the service has been upgraded, but it still supports the previous clients or old clients or old consumers. And who is the old consumer? Your document which was created in 2007 format. There is another change which happens in 7 to 10, that Microsoft Office 2007 document was in doc format, but now with 2010 the format becomes the docx, right? But still Microsoft gave this a thought that if we convert this, if we do not allow the previous files to be opened, then probably there would be a big chaos. We would impact our customers a lot, right? And it will take at least some years for people to start using the docx format, and we cannot change it abruptly, right? There has to be a graceful extinction or graceful deprecation for any product while you are versioning. So this is a very important concept, graceful depreciation, right? So you are deprecating, but you are doing a graceful deprecation. So this is a backward compatibility. And what is a forward compatibility? Can anybody tell me? So we understood what is a backward compatibility. Yes. So now even Kamal replied. Thank you, Kamal. Now, so Kamal is saying that 2007 can open the 2010 document. Exactly. So this is the forward compatibility. So when Microsoft released this 2010 Office services, they also give a thought that we should also promote, we should also give the forward compatibility, because if I send you an email, I send you a work doc, and I am Amit and I have 2010, which is a docx, and Kamal is still on the lower version. Kamal still is running the 2007, which is the doc format. If I send him an email with a Word attachment, Kamal should be able to open it, right? If not, then the product will not consider to be deemed very good, right? There would be issues. So this is the forward compatibility. So while versioning of the main focus and main intent of sharing this, that you see a lot of theory written around in these slides, but since now you have understood this concept, and I hope apart from Kamal, everybody else is listening and could understand this concept, we will take this forward. So non-backward compatible changes can be removing an operation, renaming an operation, changing the parameters, and changing the structure of complex data type. So from a service standpoint, what could be the non-backward compatible change? That you have an operation and you remove it, right? So you are not adding something new. If we add something new, it will be a forward compatibility that the new clients cannot access it because they are not ready, they don't know about it. But yes, what is a non-backward? That you can remove something which is existing. This will be a non-backward compatible change, right? And you can rename something. So this is a non-backward compatibility, means if we read this line, the new version of the service cannot interpret the data formats of the older versions, right? So backward compatible changes can be, let's take some examples which are mentioned there on the slide. Correcting service implementation, let's say a service implementation has some bug. Interface modification due to addition or deletion of parameters, and service implementation change, which no change to the service interface due to change in the business rules. Right, so this is backward compatibility, and non-backward compatibility is the newer version of the service cannot interpret the data formats from the old versions because something has been removed, and now if that particular request continues to come, so the service will not identify. I don't understand this method, this has been removed. I cannot do anything about it, right? So this slide was just to give you a very good idea and concept about the backward and the non-backward compatibility, right? So different aspects of versioning. Now there are different aspects of versioning. Changes can happen at different stages in the service life cycle. So now you've started getting a feeling, I guess, I assume, that whatever that I'm discussing here is not something very new which you have never heard about. Or whatever concept that we discussed today, I assume that all of us know about them, but maybe not in this context, maybe not with these notions and terminologies that we are using. We all knew what is backward and forward, right? So most of the things that we see in today's session, we all knew about them. It is just that we are bringing them, we are trying to collate them in terms of the versioning. So changes that can occur in different aspects of the service concept. What all changes that can occur? Interface change, right? Data type change, message change, operation change, binding change, policy change, implementation change, business functionality change. So these are all nature of changes which can happen in a service or in, so business functionality change, that instead of we were dividing something by 100, now we have to divide it by 200, right? This is a business change because initially it was 100% of something, now it is 200% of something. Let's say some financial change. This is a financial service. Service contract change. Again, that the contract between the service and the consumer, it changes. That okay, anything related to performance, anything related to okay, what data that they will exchange between them, anything. Interface change. That means how the resources access, what is the how they are accessing each other. So it is the interface, what interface they will use. Data type change, that anything was some data type was integer. Now since the new value can be in fraction now, so you have to change the data type into float. So I hope you know what is float and what is integer, or something that was integer earlier now can be string. So this is again a service has to undergo a change. Let's say there was an employee ID which was for your organization, which was running numbers in numeric. Now suddenly your organization decides that they want to append some alphanumeric character in the employee ID, right? So what will be the change? So you have to change the data type in your service. So from integer, your data type will change to string, which will be alphanumeric, or it could be alphanumeric, right? So string can have alphanumeric values as well. So for this change, the entire service has to be changed. So when I say entire service, the data type, the message change, operation name change, or the new operation is being added. Binding change. This is again very typical SOAP and WSDL related term. So policy change. There are so many governing policies which are governed by a service which are related to security. WX policy is one of the another big areas under SOAP services. Implementation change, just like the business functionality change, right? So these are type of changes. So again, so we will discuss, so whatever examples that I was giving you earlier have been given in this slide. A change name of an operation, an addition of an operation, delete of an operation. So this is, so I already discussed this slide, that the examples which I was giving you earlier on the previous slide, right? Category of changes, right? So the initial slides were talking about the type of changes and versioning approach. Now category of changes. So all the changes have been categorized. So once these changes are being done, reflected, they enter the system. They are done by the providers, they are done by the service developers. How they actually embed, how they are being introduced in the new system. So there could be a minor release change, or there could be a major release change. Minor release change is something that you are using Adobe Acrobat Reader 8.0, and after that you have Adobe Acrobat Reader 8.5. So this is a minor change, right? So let's try to understand minor change in more detail. A correction of a bug of a performance enhancement. So there was some bug in the product. Let's say you are not able to move back and forth in the product very well, and so that was a bug in the product, and Adobe has fixed that bug in the product and they have released a new version. This type consists of adding new methods to a service wherein the WSDL is changed with no impact on service consumers. So now let's say this is a backward change. This reason that I am adding some new operation. Let's say I am adding a new operation to just take any hypothetical example here. Let's say there is an employee service which has different operations. Now I am developing a new service, and when I say developing a new service, that means I am adding a new operation to the existing service, and that service is actually doing some business analytics on the employee data in terms of what is the age of the employee, what is the employee male or female, and what is the average age and what is the average skill set, so that the organization can know whether they should perform some KT, some performance programs with them so that they can be promoted. Let's say I'm taking a very hypothetical example. If you don't like, please suggest me something else. Okay, there is one question coming from Vijay here. What does security service change come under? Okay, and why are you giving example of SOAP WSDL instead of REST WADL? Okay, so I'll answer these questions one by one, Vijay. So security certificate change come under. So security certificate change will come under the security change which I was giving you, the policy change. So WSDL has a policy, and WX policy is one of the very big areas where all these security things comes under, right? So this is one of the very legitimate kind of changes which services undergoes. Now to answer your second question, why are you giving example on SOAP WSDL instead of REST WADL? Yes, this is again a very good question. That if you remember, Vijay, I told you at the beginning of the session that versioning of web services, this is what we are discussing in at large today, right? So we are not just discussing versioning of REST web services. This is even the session title for today, and the concept I have given you the example of backward compatibility and forward compatibility, right? Or the non-backward compatibility, or whatever Word example which Microsoft Office example which I shared with you. The concept of versioning, be it REST, be it SOAP, the concept remains the same. If you remember, I discussed this point early in the morning when we started this session. So there is a very small differences in how they are done, we'll see those slides, but the concept and the fundamentals remain the same. Okay, so I hope I answered your question 1 and 2. Please let me know with a response. The third question, which is coming from Vijay, is where does network firewall related to change come under? Okay, again this is a smart question which Vijay is asking. This is again a policy related change, because this is not a business change, this is not a operation change, this is not a data type change, this is not a message change, but this is a policy change. There are also few instances when this firewall or related issue, because WS policy itself is a very big concept, right? So even policy has different modules and different concepts, but eventually everything will come under the WS policy. I hope I answered the third question as well. Please help me with a yes or no. Right. So what is the minor release? That there was some issue, there was some internal issue in the product or in the service, and it got fixed, and we just release a new version, right? Your Windows has a lot of memory issues. There would be Windows 8.7 and the Microsoft will fix it and you will have a new version. So this is a minor release. And also in the minor release, the provider can also add some new functionality, right? We can add some new operation. The beauty about this minor release is that there is no impact to the existing customers, existing consumers, existing clients. Reason? Because if something has been added new, it will not impact. The existing clients, customer, consumer does not know about this new. So they will not send anything new, provided they tend to know about this. Right? The next is the major release. Now from Acrobat 9.0, you come to Acrobat Reader 9.10 point something. Or we see this versioning coming in Chrome, Google Chrome, or browsers, or different things that we use. So if it is changing from X point something to Y point something, so that means it is a major change and something major has been changed here. Now what could be that major change? Just try to understand that in this case the consumers must be notified. Now this change may or may not be a non-backward compatible change. That they may have changed something which the existing client should be notified by any means, because they may continue to stop using the service. They may start getting errors if they are not notified and if they do not incorporate those similar changes at their end. Make sense? Okay, so this is the same thing. This is because the current consumers cannot invoke the new version without considering the web services modified functionalities. So the consumers should eventually know what actually the service has undergone in terms of changes, so that they could incorporate those changes at their end and continue to use those services even after the changes happens. Right? Let's take a very basic example. Every time we get a new installer or new product, the prerequisites of those products increases in terms of the RAM and the computing power, right? So the Microsoft 1995, I heard some background noise. Did anybody try putting this on mute or something? Is the Edureka's admin guys doing some change, guys? Okay, so Edureka admin team, if you guys did something, so maybe you can just mute at your end. Okay, sorry about this interruption, guys. So what we were discussing, that the major release is something which your consumers should be notified. If they don't, then probably they would eventually face some challenges in continuing using that service. And this is what we have been talking here, right? Now we have discussed the types of changes, nature of changes, the basic principle, what all can be changed. Now, all those changes, there is a principle that we have grouped all these changes into different patterns. So the changes we have already discussed, the categories of changes, or you call them types of changes, but they are grouped under different patterns. And let's quickly discuss these patterns, what these patterns are, people. So consumer binding pattern. So if I just explain you this in one line, that whenever a new version of a web service is released, whether a major or a minor version, the consumers are notified about the change, and going forward they are responsible for changing the code to access the new version. So this is a consumer binding. And similar, this is what the name is suggesting, that the binding is on the consumer. The producer or the provider will let the consumer know, hey, this is what we have changed, and going forward please make sure that you incorporate those changes and you can continue using these services. Consumer binding pattern are actually very important aspect in area of REST web services, but this pattern is not very common and not very familiar in SOAP REST web services. Why? Let's try to understand why. Now the next few lines which you see in the slide number 17, they are mostly on some terminologies related to the UDDI. So UDDI is Universal Description Discovery Integration, which is a repository of all the services that we have for all the organizations. So there is a concept that how we store and how we version those services, so that any consumer can come and look into the services and start using it. So UDDI is one concept, right? So consumer, and there are certain terms, and T model is again, it is a data structure representing a service type in UDDI. So T model is something which describes about your service. This is how my service is all about. So any service consumer will come, take a look, and the service consumer will know, okay, this is what this service is. So that service could be any healthcare related service or any soccer score match related service that you see a lot of websites. You have soccer scores or you have cricket scores if you are a cricket fan. So these days it's very much cricket fever in India. So any services, it could be related to the stocks, the NASDAQ stock services. So they are all registered in UDDI. If the enterprise, if the producer wants to register them, and if there are any changes, then they will let you know this is the change. If Facebook makes change any API in the Facebook login, what will they do? So they will continue to run that service for some time, but they will make sure that they release the new service in a consumer binding pattern, so that they will let the consumers know that this is the change that needs to be implemented, and this is how you can continue using these services, right? So we have already discussed the types of change, but now we would be categorizing them under different patterns. And patterns are nothing but the way of categorization of implementing and designing them, and these patterns really help the architects in designing the systems. If you remember, a lot of patterns in Java, like we have the facade pattern, we have the adapter pattern, we have the singleton pattern, which is very commonly used. So here also we have the patterns. Why I'm giving you all this detail? So maybe if you can correlate. And this pattern concept does not look to you altogether very new. So again, a couple of facts about this pattern change, that this consumer binding pattern may impose changes in the customer code, at least in the search performed on the registry of accessing a version. So the provider will change, it will re-register the service in the UDDI, so the consumers will automatically be notified. It is not something that there will be some email going from Google or Facebook that we have changed the services. No, if the providers are registered in UDDI, the clients and the provider, automatically there is a WDL or a new WSDL which will be shared with the consuming teams. So this is all being done automatically, and this is the reason why we have these UDDI in place, because UDDI is the repository, is the standard for all the REST and SOAP web services that we have, right, all across the globe by different enterprise for different. There are so many telecom APIs that we have which governs different policies. So there are so many services which are government regulated services, and they are exposed by the government, right? The US government, the US federal government. So even those are registered there. So if we go on the next slide, you can on the slide number 19, you can see a very good picture of what this consumer binding pattern is all about. So, and it is very consumer centric, that now whatever request, whatever version the consumer will ask for, the UDDI will only return that particular version to the client, right? Otherwise the client will get an exception, and if that particular version is removed from the UDDI by the provider, in that case the client will get an exception. Now, what is the reason why this this pattern is very consumer centric? Reason that maybe there could be a situation, and which is not a hypothetical situation, this happens, that if it is not very consumer friendly or consumer centric, the consumer will continue to use the service, and the consumer will never know that the new service, a new version has already been released, and the consumer can switch over or migrate to a newer service. So that is why it is very consumer centric, right? So, and again I come back to Vijay's question that he asked, that whatever that we are discussing are not very specific to REST or SOAP. These are very generic concepts related to versioning, right? Again, I heard some sound, maybe some admin guys can take care of this. Okay, layer of indirection pattern. Any clue what do you understand by layer of indirection pattern? So again, this is a very good concept in a term that let's say we have, so I'll just read this out for you. When a new version of web service is released, the consumer can transparently migrate to the new release. This ability by the layer of indirection through a routing mechanism that ensures content-based routing or user-based routing, right, based on the IP of the request. So if you see this diagram, this will give you the explanation of what we are discussing here. I'll just I'll zoom in this diagram for you if this is not very clear to you. So what is happening now? We are moving ahead with a scenario where you have both the versions available, a lower version, an older version, and a higher version. Both versions are available, and you have different clients. Now there is a router in between which is taking care, okay, this request is coming from a version 1.0 client. Now I should redirect this client to the version 1.0 service, and similar for the another case. So this is some additional functionality which is happening at the provider end, because this is the additional functionality which is happening, right? So now the question comes, who is doing this routing? We have never heard, this is something new for us, that there is a router which is doing all this extra job for us. But now we will see the concept of routing a little later in the next slides. But before this, I just want to read out one point for you. The use of layer indirection allows two minor releases to coexist without changing the consumer's code and help to ensure a graceful migration to a new release. So if you guys remember, I was talking about this concept and term graceful migration, which is very important. You cannot discontinue any existing service at just one go, right? So there has to be a graceful migration. So this is a transition period in which both the services are available and both are being entertained, and the clients who are still using the old services are being notified. Probably this is the new version available, and these are the changes that will be required in order to make sure that you start pointing to the new. So few of the shortcomings of this change. In case of a major release, the consumer will need to change their code. That is for certain, that there would always be a transition phase that the provider would be migrating from a minor to a major release. And whenever you have a major release, the consumers will always have to undergo a change. And what if for some organizational reason we need to migrate to a new version release without changing the current consumer code, calling the new service with the old client? Now we are just trying to assimilate a hypothetical situation that even if the consumers were supposed to change the code, the implementation, what if they don't? So we'll see this, what will happen. So this leads to using an adapter to enable the use of a new major release for current consumers until all the consumer code is modified. So we'll see this in the next slide, what we mean by this statement. So what is happening, that we are giving some time to the consumer that eventually the change has to be made, and we have created an adapter which we talked about. There was a router in between. So this adapter was taking care of all this migration, so that until unless all this change happens and instead of 2 versions there is only 1 version available, this router will help us in doing this migration, like migrating the old request to the old endpoint and not to the new endpoint. So Vijay is asking me one question here. I still do not understand why consumer binding is more used by SOAP and not REST. So I'm not sure why Vijay you made this perception that consumer binding is more used by SOAP and not REST. No, that's never the case. I think it is too early to build this perception, and what I would suggest you to just be patient a little for next 30-40 minutes. When we'll just run through all the slides, you'll get a very good picture that what should happen in what scenario. Okay, thank you Vijay. Is the added router something the organization would run or a service UDDI offer required? That's a very good question, Steve. Thank you for asking this. So routing, if you guys remember, we were discussing that routing is something that would be done by the provider end, right? So, and also nothing, it has nothing to do with the UDDI. UDDI is just a repository. So if I come back to my second day discussion, we discussed about the concept called ESB, Enterprise Service Bus, or OSB, Oracle Service Bus is just one of the products. So when we say routing or a router, it is actually the Enterprise Service Bus which is in place, right? So here the Enterprise Service Bus is doing all this data routing for you, that it is helping in trying to make sure that the right consumer reaches the right endpoint and there are no errors, just to minimize the errors, and some other data massaging related things. So this is the role of a ESB. Now we can correlate what is the role of a router, right? So I see a yes coming from Steve. Thank you, Steve, for asking this, and this was really a very wonderful question that you asked. I have one slide in this session itself that will give you a very holistic overview of the ESB, how this ESB comes into picture in this scenario. So now we have another pattern, which is the adapter pattern. The adapter pattern consists of adapting the client request and response to be able to consume to a new major release of the service. So this is another adapter, that be it a router or be it the adapter, the implementation more or less remains the same, that the client is asking for the WS consumer, you can see, is asking for a version 1 point something, but the provider has 2.x version, right? Can you see this? So we'll see what happens next. Okay, so this slide should answer all your queries. So in the first adapter pattern, what will happen? That if you have a router in picture, so adapt, that means it is adapting your client to the actual which is available. So it is kind of a mediator pattern. The router is kind of a playing of a mediator role, that probably this is not available and probably this is what I can give you. But there is something extra which this adapter is doing in between. Let's say what this adapter is doing, which is very interesting for all of you to know. Let's say the client is requesting a version 1.x and the provider has 2.x version available. So what to do? So what the adapter will do, the adapter is so intelligent that adapter will mock the request within itself in such a way that it will take the original request from you, it will mock the request, it will proxy your request in such a way that it suits, it is as per the requirement based on the version 2.2, and it will send that request to 2.0 provider, it will take the response back and it will again do the proxy on your response and give it back to the client. So adapter has played the role of a mediator where it has become a proxy between the client and the consumer. The consumer will never know that from where it is coming, and the provider will also assume that everything is fine, but which is not. So now you realize how important these adapters are. So they are actually mocking up your services or proxying your services. Now if you remember 2 days back I was discussing the same concept, that this is a concept where you bring a proxy service, a proxy adapter in between a business and a consumer, a service and a consumer. And this is called as, this concept is called as service virtualization. I hope you remember these terms. So whatever that we are discussing, I will always be reiterating my examples and would be trying to put all the pieces together. Okay, so Raghu is saying basically translate request to 2x and response to 1x. Yes, exactly like this. So it will do whatever is required to make this request response happen successfully. Now, why do we are applying this router based and adapter based patterns? So if you see this diagram, I'll just quickly go through. Oracle service bus, or you write as enterprise service bus, that means the same. So you have different versions of clients and you have different versions of providers, and this Oracle service bus or enterprise service bus is making sure that every client and every provider, every client gets the response the best that they could. And what all the ESB does, so we have seen one property of ESB is the routing. The second property of ESB is mediation, right? And the third property of ESB is orchestration. The fourth property of ESB is data massaging. And the fifth property of ESB is data validation. So I am sure you guys are familiar with these terms. If not, maybe quickly you can put it as a note. ESB, I'll just repeat it one more time. Routing. Second, mediation. Third, orchestration. Fourth, data validation. And fifth, the binding, right? So everybody gets whatever they need so that this ESB solution eventually succeeds, right? So there is a lot which is actually being done by the ESB solution. So I'll just quickly move forward because I've explained you in detail what is this ESB solution doing. So again, using this approach on any enterprise service bus offers these advantages. A minor release can be addressed without modifying the consumers, and test sites can be addressed through content-based or user-based routing. Exactly. A migration to a major release can be handled progressively using enterprise service bus to adapt the client request and response. So the minor releases, the minor versions, and nothing is changed, and for the major, a migration, the clients have to update. Mediation, if you remember, I was discussing this term, mediation. in a bus solution is mainly configured using proxies to access business services, right? And in order to do all this, there are certain concepts, which is like there are certain pipelines, there are certain stages, actions, branches, which is how this ESB solution is made up of. So any programming language is made up of JVM and JDK, JRE, and then you have classes, you have methods, you have jar files. So similarly, these are the components of any enterprise solution service bus. So they have pipes, they have pips, pips is not mentioned, they have pips, they have pipes, they have stages, they have action, branches, routing node. So based on what product that you use, it could be ESB solution, and there is one more solution which is enterprise service bus from JBoss or Red Hat, which is called Mule, M-U-L-E. So they all do the same things, right? So now we'll just give you some examples that whatever that we are discussing, how it looks like. Okay, so this is a quite interesting slide. I would advise you to just understand. For example, for a major 1.x version, we will have one proxy, one or more business services, right? One per minor release and one per WSDL. So we have one proxy, we have different business services, right? Why we have different business services and one proxy? Because this is a minor change, or it could be a major change. So when we have this major change, so we will be deploying different services, but the proxy service will be the same. And every request will come to the proxy, and proxy is the concept of service virtualization, and proxy will decide, okay, which client, from which client it is coming, and to which business service, to which actual service I should forward this request, so that the request response happens successfully. Okay, there's a question coming from Hugh Gaplin here. Thank you, Hugh, for asking this. When a provider sets up a new service version, what do they typically have to do to get the ESB stuff in place? More programming? Service version? Okay. So ESB is would be and automatically would be in place, right? ESB is not something that because of this new version is coming, then they would have put this ESB in place, because the purpose of ESB is, I've already mentioned you 5 reasons to have an ESB, not just routing. Routing is one purpose, right? But ESB is also doing some other, doing a mediation and orchestration stuff for you, data validation, data massaging, right? So ESB will be in place, and what you will do, you will just create a proxy service, and if there is a new version, then you will create a new stage. So stage is a kind of a new component that you create with every proxy. So there will be one stage. Let's say in this example, there is new business service, which is v1_u02 which is added. So there would be a new stage that would be added, and stage is nothing like a switch parameter. If you know, in programming we use a switch construct, that okay, or case construct. So here it has 2 matches, but if there is another version, it will have 3 matches. Switch 1, switch 2, or switch 3, or case 1, case 2, case 3. So we will introduce a new stage here. So I hope that answers your question. Please let me know with a yes or no. So again, if we have create a, okay, there is another question from Hugh coming back. Create a proxy. Is that a configuration or programming, or sometimes one, sometimes the other? So when I say we are creating a proxy, it is the combination of configuration as well as programming, right? So Hugh, this is very fundamental, that in order to make the configuration work, there should be a piece of code, there should be something which there should be some component which will read the configuration, and there is no point, and if we just have standalone configuration or standalone code, they will not serve the purpose. So programming language or module and a backbone configuration file, they come together, they comprehend each other in a runtime environment. So when I say proxy, it is just a service that you are creating on top of your business service. It is another service which you are creating in Java or PHP or Perl, whatever language that you want to create. I hope that answers your question, and looking forward to see more interesting questions from the audience. Where do specify these stages? So Raghu, this is a very detailed question on how to implement the ESB solution. So if you want to learn about stages, then probably you have to learn the Oracle Service Bus or JBoss Mule. Then you will understand what are stages and what are pipes, right? So these are ESB solution components, and they have different terminologies and different products. I hope your answer your question is cleared. Okay, so Hugh says really not clear about an ESB in its practical terms. Okay, so this is very important to understand, Hugh. So I will take another couple of minutes for you to make you and all of you understand what is ESB. So we saw the problem that we have different clients available requesting for different service providers, and we have different providers already available, right? So there could be so what all ESB will do? So ESB will do, let's say there is a version client 1.x and the provider for 1.x is no more alive. So ESB can still help you to get the response from 2.x because it can proxy the environment. It can proxy your request in between. If you are sending, if you remember on day one, I shared an example that you are hitting a billing service and the billing service is charging you $6 a request. And your client, you create a client and the 50% of the requests are bad requests, whether the client ID is not 12-digit number or it is an old client digit number. So for every bad request, you are losing $6. Now if you create a ESB solution and you create a proxy service in front of that actual service, so what will it do? Your request will actually go to the proxy service, which is a kind of an adapter or router, whatever you call it. So these are all synonyms. The concept remains the same. So what this proxy service will do, it will take your request, it will like redefine your request, do all the data massaging, mediation, orchestration, and it will send your request to the actual provider, takes back the response, again work on your response, do a data validation, massaging, and send back a response back to the original client. So this is the role of a ESB solution, which is very important. So Hugh says, so the ESB sounds like a whole lot of additional development to support the deployment on versioning. So the answer is yes and no both. Why yes? Because what are you achieving with this ESB solution? You are creating a middleware in your solution. So ESB solutions are middleware solutions. If you don't do this, so in a real life scenario where you take an example of a financial trading application or a telecom application, there are millions and billions of requests which comes to the services every day in 24 hours, right? And if you do not have such robust application in place, you cannot hit those backend services directly. Those are all third-party services, right? You cannot hit the BlackBerry service over and over again until and unless T-Mobile verifies it, right? So ESB solutions are of great importance for any enterprise solutions. So I would request you to spend some time on the understanding the underlying importance of these ESB solutions, how they work, and post that you will have a very good idea. I hope you must be satisfied with my answer, and I look forward to see your response, yes or no. So a quick check on what we have covered so far. So we have learned that different types, change types that we have different patterns, how we exercise, how we, what do we do in order to make those patterns implement, and what is the concept of deprecating or retiring services. So these are the high level concepts, and in fact in detail, that we have covered so far. Okay, so Hugh is asking, you have said that SOA is a set of principles. In practice, it is an ESB essential. Your question seems to be a little not very clear to me because of certain question marks and commas that you put, but still I'll try to answer that. Yes, SOA is just a set of principle that you want things not to be tightly coupled, very agile, very robust in terms of performance, and there is no single point of failure, right? So these are all, it should be very discoverable, the reusability. So all these are SOA principles. And how do we achieve these principles, right? Now SOA is just a principle. But how do we achieve these principles? We achieve these principles with the help of web services. We achieve these principles, we even take these principles further by bringing in a ESB solution with the help of REST web services. So these are the ways how we implement SOA solutions, SOA principles. Now I'm pretty sure you must have at least some clarity to what we have been discussing, because we have to now even rush with the rest of the slides that we have. Versioning with the help of proxy services. So this is, we have already discussed in detail what is versioning and how this proxy services can help. So we have been discussing all this for the last 10-15 minutes, right? So again, so now there is an important concept. Hugh, probably if you can just reply with me yes or no, this will help me in evaluating how we are moving ahead with the session. So this, your response will really help me. Do you have slides for capacity planning too? Which probably you have to be a little give more details. What do you mean by capacity planning? Do you mean the performance of the web services in terms of the payload that they can handle? So this is what I'm assuming. So support versioning via content negotiation. So what is content negotiation? Now this concept is very REST web services specific concept that we in so in REST web services the provider and the consumer does a content negotiation. So let's try to understand what is a content negotiation. Versioning your API is the way to avoid breaking your clients and consumers. Very basic, straightforward. Okay, so I see a yes coming from Vijay. Okay, so Madhi is asking me a question in today's session. Are we going to see some specific example that show us how to version a software and how to configure an adapter or router to make it work? So Madhi, in order to ask this, to answer this question, this is what we have been looking, the examples, the ASB example, the blue diagram which I showed you is on the similar lines, right? So we have been seeing that you have different clients on different versions, and you have different providers, and what all the ESB service is doing for you. So yes, we are pretty much covering, and I would say 50% of the examples we have already covered, right? And that is the sole purpose why we are trying to get into the examples with the help of images and some live examples which I am giving you as per the industry practices and standards and based on my professional experience so far. Okay, but what we have seen have not been specific. So this is a 3-hour session, Mandy, and we have to cover a lot of points. So this is all that we can cover, and if you are looking for anything more specific, then you have to go back to Edureka or your management team, and maybe we can organize one more detailed session for you or whatever. But this session is what it is, and only this can be covered in 3 hours time. I hope that answers your question. Support versioning via content negotiation. So what HTTP header contains? So this is for HTTP, this concept is very specific to the REST style of web services, which is the combination of resources. So we see when we do a HTTP request and we see a HTTP response. So there are two attributes which we always see. One is the accept and one is the content type. So the accept header allows clients to specify the media type or types of the response they desire or they can support. The content header is used by both clients and servers to indicate the format of the request or response body respectively. So let's take some examples. You see some code examples. Okay, so what this is doing? So this is a REST web service request, which is a GET operation, and we are trying to retrieve a JSON format here. So what this GET operation is telling you, to retrieve a user in JSON format, this is the URI, the resource is your product, and it says it will accept the application JSON format with a version 1.1. So the response which will come from the provider, it says HTTP 200 OK, that means it is a positive response, content type application JSON and version equal to 1 and the details. So this is the kind of content negotiation that this provider may have the media type for application XML or application text. But now the client is explicitly saying, give me the version number 1, take my request to the version number 1 service and give me the output in application JSON. So the response is matched exactly based on what is being sent by in the request. So Mandy is saying what we have been, okay, I already answered that. So in that case, okay, so I've already answered this question, no worries, I'll just go ahead. Now we'll take some more examples. Because now we have to understand that in REST web services, the versioning of, we see that different clients are sending different versions and different data types, which was not in the case of SOAP, because SOAP was always the SOAP XML request and response. But now the complication has increased to an extent that we have different data types as well. So the client will send the version, what version it wants to invoke, and what is the media type it accepts as a response. So the example to which you see here, to retrieve version 2 of the same resource which we try to access in example 1 in a JSON format. And in example 1 it was version 1, here it is version 2. So we see the response of the version 2 in the JSON format. So what is the difference that you see in the response? In response for version 1 there were only 2 attributes, the ID and the name. But now in version 2 you can see 4 categories, 4 attributes, the ID, name, category and the subcategory. So this is the difference why we need to have different versions, and these versions are being negotiated based on the accept tag in the client request. Right. So what's common and uncommon between these two examples? Notice how the URI is fetching different responses by just specifying the version number. So these examples are very important for you to understand how the versioning, how this minor and major releases, and how this content negotiation happens between a REST web service client and a provider. Example 3. Now we have more examples. I remember one of you, maybe Kamal or Raghu, asked me this question in some time back, that now let's say these examples 3 says to retrieve version 1, except header can allow you to allow multiple media types. So now what this client is saying, that I can accept application JSON of version 1, and I also have the capability to accept application XML of version 1. So I can accept both, right? So what will happen? Now this request will go to the client, the provider. So provider will have some priority, will have some algorithm set that, okay, for this kind of request, what it should ideally send. So what will the client, provider send? The response from the servers, if it favors application XML, would be. So it says if it favors. So when you write your providers, so your providers, you always give a priority, you always give a list that in what priority you would want to return your response. So the provider has the priority of sending application XML as first number priority in the priority list. And this priority was already mentioned in the accept attribute of the client. So it got matched and the provider returned the XML response instead of a JSON response, which is very important. Can you see this? So provider here, for example number 3, is returning the XML response and it says if it favors. So this is a assumption, if it favors. Example 4. So we are just trying to see all the permutation and combination. To illustrate the use of content type while sending data for post. So this is the example of post. Post is that we are creating a resource. We are not getting a request, we are creating. And in the content type, so now this is a post request. It will not have accept. It will have content type because you are not accepting anything. You are sending. So it says I am sending this product details to create this resource and the content type is application JSON and the version of this service would be 1. Another similar example that we have, now we are doing post in the example number 5 with version number 2, the content type remains the same. So if you remember in version 2, we are also sending the category and the subcategory because version 1 and version 2 APIs are different, right? So there is no accept attribute here in the request. It has changed to content type. So now let's take an example. We are talking all happy for now that we will give this and it would be returned. What if the content that you send is actually does not exist at the provider side? So this is the kind of exception that you will get. You are sending a version number 999 and this 999 does not exist, so it will send you a response with the HTTP status code as 406. That means not acceptable, and we already saw this status code in the table that we saw earlier in today's session. So these are and apart from sending the not acceptable status code, it also mentions that these are all the possible data types or the payload types which the provider supports, so that going forward for the subsequent request the client can send the right version number and the right content type, right? So a list is being received from the provider. This is what all I support for different versions. So please make sure that you send me the right version and the right request type next time. So now these are very basic and fundamental concepts that we'll just try to understand what is the criteria to create a new post. So Vijay is asking me a question. Thank you, Vijay. What is the response for this post? So for post, Vijay, if you remember, it will only give the response as HTTP status code 400. And this will give that, okay, resources created. So get and post, if they give you 400, that means whatever they were supposed to do, it is done, the resource is found. So when you do, it gives you the positive status code, that means the post operation is being done successfully, and if you do a get for the same resource, you should be able to get the resource back because the resource is created now. I hope that answers your question. So changes that will break contracts. Okay, thank you, Vijay. Changes that will break contracts. Changing a property name, removal of property. If you remember, I was already talking about this example that if I change a first name to, if I let's say, sorry, I was taking an example that if I change the string integer property to a string property, so there would be an exception that will happen at the client side, not at the provider side, right? So this is just we are just trying to recap that what all changes can break your service. That we can change a property name from first name to first name. That will also change the your service. The client will still bind the value which is coming in the response to the name, but it has been changed to first name, so the client will not know. If you remove any existing property, if you change a property data type, I'm already discussing this so many times. Validation rule change. So these are all the criteria that you have to create a new version now. It will not be a minor version, because you have to let your clients know that this is a time to create a new version, and it will be a minor version or major version depending on the how many clients you have, right? But still it will be a new version. From 8.1 you have to go to 8.2. And what are the changes which does not actually change break your client is that you add something new. So whenever you add something new, nothing is being hampered, because if you add something new at the client or at the server, that value will come as a null or as a blank value or as a default value. If it is string, it will be a null. If it is an integer value, it will be blank or it will be 0, depending you have taken a wrapper class or you have taken a primitive data type class. So these are all technical things, right? So updating clients on deprecated resources. Again, we were discussing this concept, and this is a good concept, that now the API, the resource has already been deprecated and you are still trying to access. So what is happening? It is giving you a, just focus on the arrow. This is a new attribute which I am seeing in the response. That means in the UDDI or directly in the provider, the client has set this response as true to make the clients notify that it has been deprecated, and in the newer feature they will not be able to access this resource anymore. So the client requires a change. So this is a kind of a graceful exit, a kind of a graceful deprecation that we do. We just do not deprecate and remove the service. For some time we send the deprecate as true so that client will know and they get time.